Okay, there you go. You should be able to see the slides that say electrical planning reports. So let's get started. So welcome. My name is Wendy Wall. I'm the president of the Vancouver Island Strata Owners Association. Most of you know who we are. I'm just going to briefly say that VISOA provides education, support, and advocacy for BC strata owners. And of course, today we're all here to learn about electrical planning reports. I'll also say that I'm joining you today from the ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. You may know as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. Feel free to use the chat to tell us what area you're coming from today. All right, so we're going to cover a lot in the agenda. I'm just going to let you know right up front all the things that we're going to answer today. I'm going to start off with what changed in the Strata Property Act. What is an electrical planning report? Which stratas have to get one? What's the deadline to get one? Can a strata vote to waive it? Does it have to be updated every few years? We're going to talk about the content, what has to be in the report, which stratas can get a short report. That's an interesting one. Who is qualified to write your report? How do you pay for it? And then after it's done, who sees it? We'll talk briefly about the Form B information certificate, and then we're going to talk about how this legislation weaves in with other legislation about requests to alter common property for installation of electric vehicle charging stations and infrastructure. So I know that looks like a lot, but we're going to get through it. Okay, so what changed in the Strata Property Act? You might recall Bill 22 in April. It was called the Strata Property Amendment Act. Well, it received royal assent in May, and that's where we first saw the words electrical planning reports, but they didn't become effective yet because it was waiting for regulations. So what you saw in the media on December 6th was that the regulations came out in the Order in Council. And what this did is it brought those parts of the strata property into effect, and the regulations provided all the details that we needed that we didn't know about. So at December 6th, we all felt like this was brand new. We finally knew a little bit about electrical planning reports. So I'm not going to read these out, but later on, when you're looking at the slides or you're looking at the video, these are the specific sections of the Strata Property Act and the regulations that all of today's content is based on. So if you're interested in electrical planning reports, I really encourage you to go online and read, just Google Strata Property Act or Google Strata Property Regulations, or go to VISOA's website where we have the direct links to these things. I've had a lot of questions about why. Why electrical planning reports? Why did this legislation come in? So I think it helps to look a little bit at the background of what's going on in British Columbia. We have this thing called the Clean BC Roadmap, and what it does is it sets out the plan for the province to expand and accelerate our climate action to meet our greenhouse gas target and eventually to make our province net zero emissions by 2050. So that's a very ambitious plan. But basically, it has many bits of information in that plan. But today we're focusing on strata. So just pulling out a couple of things that affect us the most. After 2030, we won't be able to buy equipment for space heating and water heating that is anything that's not efficient. So if you have a gas boiler now, you're not going to be able to replace it with another gas boiler. Really important for our buildings that have some of this equipment that's not powered by electricity. The other thing is the plan accelerates the adoption of electric vehicles. And by 2035, if you go to buy a new vehicle, you're not going to be able to find anything other than zero emission vehicles, which right now are electric. So the electrical planning report, when you think about that background, this is really the first step for you to plan for those changes or additions. And it's the changes and additions for heating, cooling, EV charging. You might have other mechanical equipment, but basically you need to prepare for replacing equipment that's not currently powered by electricity. You need to understand your needs and your limitations. And we're going to come back to this over and over today. What are your needs and what are the limitations of your current electrical system? And then the electrical planning report is really helping you be ready to take the next step. It's not your plan. It's a tool in your toolbox to give you information to then make your plan and reach out to the professionals that you need to implement your plan. So what is the report? Again, we are looking at this from the perspective of the Strata Property Act. The industry might have been doing planning reports for a long time, but we're only looking at the parameters and the definitions of what it is under the Strata Property Act. I think it's helpful to start with what it's not. So it is not a defined scope of work. It is not a quote for a project, and it's not even a specific plan forward. You haven't made your decisions yet. You haven't seen the information to base decisions on yet. So it's not an EV ready plan. It's not a specific set of choices yet. But what it is, it's a report about your current electrical system, and that includes the entire system for the property, your common property, and all the electricity that's needed for the strata lots as well. The idea of the plan is to anticipate your future electrical needs. Again, the limitations of your current system, and then to give you some ideas, what measures could you potentially take to reduce the capacity on your current system? A lot of stratas, for example, have switched from old lighting systems to LED, and essentially that frees up capacity. And then also, what measures could you potentially take to increase your capacity? And one of the examples of that would be a service upgrade from your utility. Fortis, BC Hydro, could also be major upgrades to your transformer, things like that. So the report is giving you this high-level overview of what's going on with your electrical system and potential ideas of what you could do. So if we think about it like this, it's a resource to educate us as owners and to start those discussions. What are our needs? What are our needs in the future? What are our priorities as owners? Where we hit really hard by the heat dome, is cooling the priority in our building? Or are we fine in that regard and something else is our priority? It's really important for owners to have those discussions and figure that out before you go and jump into a project. So the electrical planning report is really your starting point. It's your place to start a planning process. The other thing that we hope it will be helpful for is assisting councils. Right now, as councils, we're getting requests from owners to install heat pumps in their units. We're getting requests from owners who want to install EV charging in their parking stall. And as council members, we don't always know whether we should be saying yes or no to these requests. We don't necessarily have the information in front of us to make an informed decision. So the electrical planning report is a start there to give you, particularly in the idea of limitations of your system, to understand from an electrical side whether there's an issue that you should be aware of before you approve some of these requests. So which stratas have to get one? Stratas with fewer than 5 strata lots aren't required. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get one or that you couldn't get one. You could, but you don't have to. And this is interesting because we have about 34,000 strata corporations in BC. Over half of them are 2 to 4 units. So that still leaves about 16,000 strata corporations that will have to get this report. And I've had some people say, oh, but it's only for residential strata lots. And there's no, all strata corporations. So it doesn't matter whether you're a strip mall where all the strata lots are commercial businesses. You could be hotel strata, condominiums, townhomes. bare land stratas, yes, you have electricity too. Also, imagine a strata where, let's say it's patches of grass where everybody pulls their RV up to their little strata lot in the summer and hooks up to the services. Those are strata lots too. So even though there's no buildings, there might be the need for an electrical planning report. The next common question we're getting is, what's the deadline? So this depends on what area of the province you're in. It's phased. So December 31st, 2026 is one of the deadlines. Well, who has to do it by then? If your strata is located in any of these areas, Capital Regional District, Fraser Valley District, Metro Vancouver Regional District. The only exception to that is if you're on certain islands. So if you're on an island that's only accessible by air or boat, you get an extra 2 years, even though you're located in one of those districts. Then, if you're located in any other place in the province, you have until December 31st, 2028. These deadlines are really important, not just for the fact that it's due by legislation, but as we see at the end of the presentation, the deadline, even if you don't get an electrical planning report by the deadline, there are consequences to that. And we're going to explore that a little bit later. So it's a little different. What if you're a brand new strata? Well, they define in the regulations a new strata as one where the strata plan was filed after December 31st, 2023. So imagine that your strata plan was filed on January 13th, 2024. That means that your electrical planning report would have the deadline of January 13th, 2029. There's questions about phase stratas, where some strata lots are built and then 6 months later more are built. They're generally on a 5-year deadline as well, but the wording for that is just a little bit longer to explain today. So I suggest you see Regulation 5.9 for all the details about phased stratas. And we've been asked, well, can a strata vote to waive the report? Can we have a 3/4 vote at an AGM and just kick it down the road? And the answer is no. There is no provision in the Act that would allow you to vote to waive or defer the electrical planning report. Your deadline is your deadline, and you must get it. So again, does this have to be updated every few years? And the answer for most stratas is no. The Act currently requires that we get one report. There's no requirement to update it. That doesn't mean that you don't want to update it. There might be reasons down the road where you do want an updated report, but that's your choice. The only exception is we were talking about phase stratas. Well, phase stratas, as it's built, the number of strata lots increase. So they have to get an updated report after so many strata lots are built. Again, sort of on that 5-year timeline. But again, read the regulation if you're a phase strata to understand when your updated report would be due. So this is the big question, of course, that we're getting is what's in it? And this is the one section of today's webinar where we're going to dig into some details. So I would encourage you to go read Strata Property Regulation 5.11 because it lists the information that has to be in the report. Just because we have information on slides, I've paraphrased or shortened some of it. So a lot of this is the exact wording, but some of it is shorter. So I really encourage you to read the regulation so you have the full wording. But basically at the beginning, the first section has to be the person that you're obtaining the report from. You want to know their name, their qualifications, what is their relationship to the strata. This is all going to sound familiar because it's very familiar to the description of this section for a depreciation report. The next thing is, what is the current capacity of the strata's electrical system? This is something that professionals can calculate quite accurately. Then it's, what are the existing demands on the system? So what devices or equipment are in your building that draw electricity? And this could be many things because every strata is different, but it could be things like heating and cooling systems, ventilation, lighting, elevators, other mechanical equipment, and of course, everything that's in the strata lots like appliances. And you might have some EV charging stations or EV charging infrastructure already. So if you do, that would be in the list as well. Then, what is your current peak demand? And the easiest way to explain what peak demand is imagine that you have electric heating on the coldest day of the year. Everybody has their heating cranked right up. Everybody's at dinner time, everybody's got their appliances going. So what is the day, that time and day of a year where you're using the most electricity ever? That is your peak demand. And that's an important part for your professional to know, to understand what is your spare capacity for your building, because you can't just keep adding on electrical devices and equipment. You need to know how much capacity you actually have for those new things. The next thing is an estimate. So this is an important word, estimate. All of these other things can be calculated very accurately, but now we're into estimates. What is an estimate of the electrical capacity that you would need to power systems that aren't currently powered by electricity? So imagine you have that gas boiler and that you can't buy another gas boiler, and you're going to have some kind of electrical system or non-fuel that will heat your building. So it's an estimate of how much electricity you're going to need if and when that system comes into place. There's also another estimate. It's an estimate of the capacity that you might need for future demands. So let's say, in addition to replacing that gas boiler, let's say you're in an old building, there's currently no cooling. We have a lot of buildings like that. Imagine that you added equipment, mechanical equipment for cooling. Imagine that your owners are adding heat pumps and your current heating system is gas. Where are you going to find the electricity to power these things? Certainly EV charging infrastructure is another one, but there might be other systems in your building that aren't immediately obvious. And your author is going to try to anticipate how much power you would need for all of this equipment. And then some ideas. Here is a part that says, well, what things could the strata do to reduce the current demands? So an example is lighting. If you're still using incandescent or compact fluorescent lighting in your hallways, in your parking levels, things like that, you might be amazed at how much power is freed up by switching your lighting over to LED. And this is the type of idea that your report should tell you as possibilities. It's not telling you to do it, it's not telling you how to do it, but it's how much electricity might you be able to free up if you did these steps. And then the opposite is, if you do have a limitation of your system, what upgrades or modification might you be able to do to increase your capacity? So again, this could be something like major work to your transformer or upgrading your electrical service from BC Hydro or Fortis, whoever supplies the electricity to the property. So thinking about those last two slides, reducing capacity, adding to your capacity, what is an estimate of the electrical capacity that might be made available by one or more of those actions if you took those steps? And again, we're looking at words like estimate and if. So although we don't have a sample of these reports yet, here are some of the expectations that we think might happen. You might find the language in the report for some of those things that are what ifs or it depends. If we look at the language, it says things like an estimate of electrical capacity or steps that a strata could practically take. These haven't been decided yet. So we would expect that the author of the report would be using phrases like the electrical capacity is in the range of, or based on similar buildings, it could be about this amount, or based on industry averages. We haven't seen the language in these reports yet, but set your expectations because they can't see into the future. They can't predict exactly what boiler replacement equipment you're going to choose. They can't predict so many of these systems. And it's about design too. It's not just about installing EV charging, it's about the load management system that you choose or how many chargers are on a shared circuit. There's all sorts of decisions to be made that will impact the amount of capacity that's going to that system or needed by that system. So again, this is a starting point. We want to understand our needs and our limitations. And then once we have this report, we've had some discussions as owners, we've set our priorities and we want to move forward with something, that's at the point that we're going to contact a professional to get more information. So you might hire a mechanical engineer to do a feasibility study about replacing that gas boiler, and then get into the nitty-gritty of, you know, what makes and models are out there. Do you have options of different systems? How much electricity do those systems use? The electrical planning report is not the time for that level of detail. It's just telling you what's possible, and then you go and do it. And this is not unlike our depreciation reports. Imagine that your depreciation report says you need a new roof in 4 years. The depreciation report is not your plan. It's not telling you what the scope of work is. It's not telling you what materials to use. It's just telling you that this work is coming up. So it's up to us as a strata to reach out to the roofing industry and get the detail that we need to be able to move forward with that project. So hopefully that analogy helps a little bit. Now, which stratas can get a short report? This is an interesting one. And I reached out to some professionals to talk about this. But basically, the author of your report will determine whether you qualify for a short report. And it really depends on who supplies the electricity. So as a strata owner, it might not be obvious where the electricity is supplied. Is it supplied by the utility like BC Hydro, or is it supplied by the strata? The Strata Corporation might own the transformer, which makes them a supplier, but even if they own the transformer, the strata might still be considered the supplier because it sub-distributes the electricity. So your author will figure this out, but this is under Regulation 511.3. And let me just go to the next slide. And the exact words in this regulation are that if each strata lot in the strata plan is supplied with electricity by a utility independently from each other, the electrical planning report only needs these two sections. The first section being the name of the author, their qualifications, etc., and then a simple statement. And the statement would be that each strata lot is supplied with electricity by a utility. A utility means something like BC Hydro, independently from each other's strata lot. So this is a tricky thing for us as laypersons to understand, but it's going to be rare, and it's going to be up to the author of the report to determine this for you. And here we get to the author of the report. Well, who can write these? We're going to talk about what the regulations say about qualifications. So there's really only two choices, an electrical engineer or an applied science technologist. And the only exception to that is when all buildings on your property are Part 9 buildings, which we'll talk about in detail on the next slide. But basically, if you are a Part 9 building, or if you have multiple buildings and every single one is considered a Part 9 building, then you also have the option of hiring a licensed electrician. You can still hire an engineer or an applied science technologist, but at least you have that option of a licensed electrician. So what is a Part 9 building? Here we have to go to the building code and say, well, there's two main categories of buildings. Some are simple buildings, which are, well, they're called simple buildings, Part 9 buildings. And the other ones are complex buildings, which are known as Part 3 buildings. So Part 9 buildings, I'm not going to read the building code to you because it's all Greek to me, but typically Part 9 buildings are houses, duplexes, and small apartment buildings. So if you're trying to figure out if your apartment style building is Part 9, here are the two factors, and both factors have to be met. You can't be more than 3 stories in height, and you can't have a footprint, your ground floor level. You can't have a footprint of more than 600 meters squared. So I tried to figure out, what does that mean? What does 600 meters squared look like? And if you had strata lots of about 650 square feet, imagine 10 of them. Imagine 10 of them on the ground floor, and that's approximately the size of 600 meters square. So that kind of gives you a hint about your building. Now, when I spoke to some professionals about this, they tried to explain to me that just because our buildings are Part 9 buildings doesn't necessarily mean that they are simple. So this is coming up with a lot of the questions about bare land stratas, thinking that electrical planning reports are not important to them. Here's what I learned. The distribution of electricity to blocks of townhouses or to strata lots that are detached homes is more complicated than you might think. And in some ways, maybe more complicated than a condo building. And here in plain language is kind of what that means is the power from the transformer might have several sub-distribution points before it eventually gets to your hydrometer, which goes to your electrical panel. And calculations have to be done at each point. So said another way, you can't exceed your electrical capacity in your unit, of course, but you also can't exceed the total capacity of your building block. So if you have 3 or 4 townhouses together, that building, you can't exceed the capacity. And you also can't exceed the total capacity at your main electrical room or your sub-electrical room. Other words that I've heard are things like the main service, and then feeders, and then sub-feeders. So again, we as strata owners don't have to understand all of this. The point is that just because you think your system is simple doesn't mean that it's simple. The calculations have to be done at every point. So you might decide that you need an engineer. So working with professionals, this is brand new legislation. This was a surprise in a way to the industry. There's no way for them to prepare for this properly until they saw the regulations on December 6th. So just like those first few years of depreciation reports, I think we have to allow time for providers to figure this out. They need to develop programs and pricing. They need to figure out how much detail are they going to put in this report. And then we have to remember, it doesn't really matter whether you're a strata of 12 units or 30 units. There is a base amount of work involved to write a report. So we have to think about, pricing is going to reflect that there's always going to be a base amount of work. They might also, depending on the equipment in your strata, they might also reach out to other professionals to get information that they will include in the report. For example, they might reach out to a mechanical engineer. We also are hearing some providers who are working together. So for example, an electrical engineer might decide to work with a licensed contractor, electrical contractor, a licensed electrician to do some of the legwork. And then the engineer could oversee all of that work, and they'd be the one that is providing the report, that you're obtaining the report from. But one thing you can do is you could ask the person you're obtaining the report from to try to write the report in plain language. This report is for the purpose of us as owners to talk about our electrical system and try to make plans for the future. If we don't understand the report, then it's not doing its job. So there's nothing wrong with asking your provider to write it in such a way that laypersons can understand. And later, maybe 6 months, a year down the road, there's nothing wrong with asking your provider to show you a sample of a report that they did for another client They might redact it to take out, identifiers of where that strata is or the name of the strata, but there's nothing wrong with asking for a sample before you hire them to see, do they write reports in a way that we think it's going to be helpful to our owners or not? So how do you pay for it? Well, we actually have two ways that we can pay for it. You could pay for it from the operating fund. Normally, under the operating fund, it's for expenses that happen once a year or more often than once a year. But the Strata Property Act has given us an exception for this, just like it gives us an exception for depreciation reports. So you could put it in your annual budget for just 1 year and include a budget line there that says electrical planning report. And as long as your budget gets passed by a majority vote at your annual general meeting, then you can pay for it that way. Alternatively, you could pay for it from the contingency reserve fund. And as you know, usually it takes a 3/4 vote to spend money from the contingency reserve fund. In this case, there's an exception. You only need a majority vote. And a majority vote is a vote greater than 50% of the votes cast. So you would just have a separate resolution to pay for an electrical planning report by majority vote. So who sees the report? It is for the benefit of you, the benefit of the Strata Corporation and your owners. It's not submitted to the government. It's not reviewed by anybody. It's just for you. You should give a copy to every owner. It's important to know that this is a legal document. Under Section 35, it lists all of the records that a Strata Corporation has to keep, and they've added electrical planning reports to that list. So any electrical planning report that has been obtained by the Strata Corporation, you have to keep. Now, we think it's going to be that you have to keep them forever. There's a regulation that has to be updated to say the time frame, but we feel that it's going to be like the depreciation reports where you have to keep them forever. And then it's important to know that when people ask for Form B, that this needs to be included. So if you're not familiar with a Form B, imagine that you're thinking of purchasing a strata lot. Typically, the realtor will ask for a Form B for you, and it lists all kinds of information like the strata fee for that strata lot, how much the strata has in the contingency reserve fund, whether there's a parking stall, things like that. But it also requires certain attachments: the current budget, rules, a copy of the depreciation report, a summary of the Strata Corporation's insurance policy, and now they've added that you have to attach an electrical planning report. So here is something that we're going to make the industry aware of, because this report, this one report, is going to be attached to the Form B a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. It has to be, you have to imagine that someone is going to read it down the road. It's not, that's why it really shouldn't be a budget or a costing for a particular project. So prospective buyers might be really interested in knowing whether your building has capacity. So here we get into a little bit of a complex part about how different parts of the Strata Property Act weave together in regards to electric vehicle charging, and specifically when an owner requests to make an alteration to common property to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure and station. So imagine that an owner has a limited common property parking stall. That's common property. Or imagine that you have common property parking stalls that are assigned by council. That's common property. So if they want to put EV charging in there, if you're not doing a Strata Corporation project to put in EV charging infrastructure, if the request is coming from the owner, and the owner is going to pay for all of this, those are the requests we're talking about here. And let's talk about how the electrical planning report ties into this. So the Strata Property Act has this brand new section. It's called Alterations to Common Property to Install EV Charging Infrastructure for owner. It's a long title. But if you look, they've just updated the Strata Property Act online, so you can now see it online. Look for sections 90.1 through to 90.3. And this is all about this process when owners make requests. The tricky part is whether or not the strata has obtained an electrical planning report or not. If it's within the deadline and they haven't got a report, Section 91 doesn't kick in yet. An owner only has the right to request under Section 90.1 to alter common property if the strata has obtained the electrical planning report or their deadline to get one has passed. So it's kind of phased. The idea here is give the time to the strata to get an electrical planning report so they can understand their capacity before the law kicks in. It gives the right to the owner to request to alter common property. So there's kind of a logical flow to the order of the way the act kicks in. So once Section 90.1 has kicked in, the deadline has passed, or you've got the electrical planning report, council can consider the request by the owner, but they can't unreasonably refuse. This is why it's so important to have the electrical planning report first, because when deciding whether to refuse the request or not, council can consider that information, the strata's electrical system and future needs. But they do have to respond to that request within 3 months, and they can require the owner to pay for it all and to agree to reasonable conditions. And there's a whole list in this section of the Act of what reasonable conditions could be considered. You'd still have an alteration agreement or an assumption of liability agreement. Get all of that on paper, but this is a section of the Act that you can read to find out more about this process. And I just said all of this that's in the slides. The only thing I didn't mention yet is, again, if 90.1 has kicked in because you've either got the report or the deadline to have one has passed, there's another little change to the Act. If you have common property parking stalls and the council is assigning those stalls, up to now, Section 76 would only allow us to assign the stall for up to 12 months. Now, if someone has made a request under 90.1 to alter common property, they have a little bit more of an assurance that it's worth them spending the money to make this alteration, to invest in EV charging infrastructure in their stall, because the council can assign it for more than 12 months. They can assign this stall for up to 5 years. But again, Section 90.1 has to be triggered to make this happen. If someone comes to you today and requests a stall for 5 years, you have to read the Act to see, do they have the right to request that yet? Because you might not have your electrical planning report yet. Okay, so for more information, please visit our website. We have some detailed blog posts on there, but there's also a lot of information on the government's website, which is here, the BC Strata housing website. Thank you everyone for coming today. It was a great turnout. We had over 400 people registered, and as as electrical planning reports start coming out 6 months, a year from now, maybe a year from now, we should have another one of these when the industry has started to produce these and we start learning about what's in them and how we're using them, and we learn from each other. So we might learn from various stratas how it's been helpful and how they've used that information to move forward with something. How many of you are having limitations that are preventing you from having heat pumps or EV charging? We are all in this together, so we learn from each other. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great weekend.